He's here. He came to hear you. He went to the. He's heard me before. He went to the doctor just now.
Just in case you don't know. And I want to welcome you to, this is the last Far in the Library of the spring series. We'll start again in the fall. And I just want to say that you, the audience, are as much an important part of this as the central conversation. I think almost everybody here has been here before, so I don't really have to say too much. Tonight we're talking about collaboration. And one of the reasons that I think that I decided this would be a really interesting thing to talk about was that as a studio artist or a solo artist over maybe the last 5 years, 6 years, I found myself in various guises more and more working collaboratively. In a sense, this is a collaboration. The Book of Lies project, my collaboration with Annie, and it's my suspicion that in certain ways this is a very, very important process for us as artists, us as makers, us going into the 21st century. So this is sort of why we've started, why we're here. I'm going to introduce you to my guests. I'll start here is Anne Bray, and Anne is a video artist. Teaches media and video all over Los Angeles, is the head of Free Waves, and across from Anne is Molly Cleator. Molly's an actress and a performance artist, and Molly and Anne have been collaborating for, 8 years? Longer than that, 9 years?
Since '89.
Okay, since '89. And I actually saw my first introduction to your work, but before I knew you, was in the piece in the Santa Monica Museum, which was just I don't know if any of you saw it. It had electrified wheelchairs and videos and chairs.
Robotic.
It was robotic, and it was
there in the video.
Oh, good. Okay, and it was just an absolutely. I was envious of the piece. It was a stunning piece, and it's really wonderful to have you here tonight. Annie Chu, the architect Annie Chu, for all the architecture students. Annie has worked all over the United States, worked with, can never say their name,
Todd Williams and Billy Sin.
Todd Williams and Billy Sin, was a partner with Frank Israel, has collaborated with artists in New York, with Dan Graham, with Mary Miss. I'm very proud to say that she and I are collaborating on public art right now. Annie has a large teaching practice and a long history of wonderful, or not a long history, a fairly long history of wonderful architectural practice. And the one, the one guy brave enough to brave us all, Barry Sanders. And Barry is an absolutely delicious writer. Barry has written a book called Sudden Glory, A Transgressive History of Laughter, which is, as he said one time,
It's better than the real title.
Right.
Well, you know, they come and they go with the words. But it's one day, Barry has been with us one other time, and one of the things that he said that I loved is that he said that he's very interested in the history of the breath. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to trace. I mean, what an ephemeral thing to try to track. And Barry has collaborated in many forms with one of the most interesting intellectuals in the United States, Ivan Illich, and has also done a lot of other collaboration. And as we talked about this, you were going to start. Remember, you had so you were going to bring a book and you were going to talk a little bit about an idea that you had, and then we were going to go to a video and then to some slides, and then we'll just start talking.
We're going to do all that?
We're going to do all of that,
Okay.
yes.
Simultaneously.
How much time do I have?
You have as long as you want, till we get impatient.
Does anyone have a class in the morning? Well, let's see. What I'm basically interested in is, though I've done collaborations, when I counted up, I've done 5 books with other people, with artists and writers. Right? So I've done a whole lot of them, I think. Some of them worked out really well, and some I feel victimized by, you know. And so while I'm interested in collaboration, actually practically doing it, I'm interested basically, because I'm trained in this way, I'm interested in the history of the idea of collaboration, right? And how it came into being. It's an idea actually when you think about the notion of collaboration and think about when the word came into the English language. It's not so very long ago. It's a 19th century term. So I tried to think about, when Eugenia invited me, about collaboration in that way as an historical notion, right, and what it looked like. And since I'm basically trained as a medievalist, right, it's the place where even though I teach lots of different classes, it's the place where I live most of the day. Right? I spend a lot of the day talking to Chaucer, and thinking about what he says and about that world. And this is what I've at least want to argue. Okay, and then we can talk about it. And that is that I think it's actually impossible, very difficult, to produce much art without collaboration. Because in the ancient world, in ancient Greece and Rome, one could not produce any poetry. Poets called the rhetor, but the rhetor could not produce any poetry without a really strong collaboration with the muses, and invokes the muses in order to do this, and particularly the mother of the muses, who is mnemosne, memory, collective memory. So that my basic collaboration as a poet in the ancient world is with all of the people in this room. I invoke the muse in order to express what everybody in the room actually feels in a tribal way, in a kind of mythic way. Right? And then in my own period, in the Middle Ages, it just isn't possible to write poetry without a collaboration, and a really strong collaboration with God. Because there is only one author in the Middle Ages, and that's God, and he's made the whole thing, from the plywood to the books to the chairs to us. Right? This is his book of nature. So it's very difficult to do that. And in fact, that Chaucer is the first person in the English language to use the word author in a secular sense. The very first person. So that in order to do that, he has to do something absolutely phenomenal, filled with a kind of religious chutzpah. And that is, he's got to take on God in order to write the Canterbury Tales. Right? And he does this in a kind of complicated way that takes some time to explain, which I won't do. When we move to the Renaissance, one of the things I think that happens is that literature, and particularly drama, because it's an age of drama, is produced with a collaboration with this new thing in the 17th century called the self. Right? It's something that people talk about. It's something that the Puritans talk about in America. It's something that John Locke spends a lot of time talking about, this notion of the self. And I think that you actually get to see it played out on the stage in what we think of as soliloquies, in which somebody like Hamlet's on the stage and in talking about whether or not he should be or not be. Right? But this is a kind of conversation with self, right? With different parts of self in a kind of collaborative way. Now, here's what I think is, here's what I spent some time thinking about, because I think that so those are basic kind of tacit, unexpressed collaborations, notions of collaboration. But the word enters the language in the 19th century, sometime just before the middle of the 19th century. And you start to see certain kinds of interesting, collaborative, poetic efforts with people like Wordsworth and Coleridge. Right? They produced the lyrical ballads at the beginning of the 19th century, but with these two people working together as friends. But I actually started to think that this idea of collaboration, as it's expressed, is prepared for us by William Blake, and prepared in this particular way. Now remember, if we say that the word enters the language at a certain moment, I think that it somehow has for me, when this happens, and I'm basically interested in tracing ideas through time, that the idea of collaboration has somehow become disembedded from everyday life and now is an entity, something we can describe and talk about and all of that. And one of my, two of the books that I've done, and one of the books I did with Illich is about the shift from oral cultures to literate cultures. So I'm interested in the invention of the printing press. And just very shortly, a decade after the printing press, what one finds is collaborative efforts between a printer, writer, and an artist. Right? Very early on, within the first 8 years of this very rudimentary press, right? And that continues. But with Blake, I think there is this basic collaboration of Blake with himself, both as writer and artist. When you see things like Songs of Innocence and Experience or The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Now, here's the turn for me. Here's the basic, what we used to call in the Catskills the basic shtick. And it's this. I think that really, truly collaborative efforts, and I take this word labor in the middle of collaboration to be important. Right? There is some labor about this, and I mean, it makes some sense when you think about it that the notion of collaboration with labor in the heart of it would come in the 19th century, what with Industrial Revolution and all, right? Because labor is a term that Chaucer uses in the 14th century. It's been there a while, but it takes on the irksomeness of work, you know, when you come to the 19th century, the kind of working on assembly line kind of work, right? The weekend is a 19th century term. 1879, the word weekend comes, so you know that labor has become intensified, not even think about childbirth, right? So is ice cream cone, just in case you get a weekend off. So this is what I think, that I don't think it's possible to have a truly transformative collaboration. And I was reminded of this because two people sitting behind me have been collaborating since the 7th grade, right? I mean, in a certain way. Okay. But that work becomes transformed somehow into pleasure, something very creative in this process of collaboration. If I think, when I think particularly this happens, that Blake first has to do something which I want to call decollaboration. And I can only use this word decollaboration not to be cute or Derrida-ish, but if you ask yourself this question as you go through the evening, what's the opposite of collaboration, do you think? For me, it's not solitary activity. I don't think it can be solitary activity because I think there's always me talking to me and me working with me in that sense, even without a kind of cute sense. But the opposite of collaboration is a very interesting notion. I couldn't think of one. I mean, the closest I actually came, and I don't think this is right for me, was flying. Flying. Where I get in the plane and I stay out of the pilot's way, right? In order to produce this thing called a flight to Kennedy or someplace, you know, in some area. But I don't think that's actually right. But what I think Blake is able to do is detach himself, decollaborate himself from the normal categories that all of us in the room have about experience. Unhinge himself from this kind of tacit collaboration that all of us have with Channel 4 and McDonald's and General Motors and stuff that we know about Monica Lewinsky. Okay? In this particular way.
But you're talking about the relationship with culture as a collaboration, is that?
Yeah, but with a certain kind of received standard notions of culture. I just want to, may I read this one thing? This is from, I'm reading it not from its proper place, but one thing that I dearly love, some of you may know this is Borges, right, the writer Borges, and he imagines a Chinese encyclopedia. Do you know this? And how animals are arranged? And he arranges them in this mythical Chinese encyclopedia imagined by Borges this way. Foucault describes this, or discusses this in The Order of Things. The animals are divided into A, those belonging to the emperor, those that are embalmed. C, those that are tame. D, sucking pigs. E, sirens. F, those that are fabulous. G, stray dogs. H, those included in the present classification. I, the frenzied. J, innumerable. K, those that can be drawn with a very fine camel hair brush. L, etc. M, having just broken the water pitcher. And N, those that from a long way off look like flies. I love the last one particularly. So the classification, I think, is important in part because of the, as Foucault describes it, also because of the impossibility of trying to think it. Okay? But there's a way that it forces you to think in different categories, in a different kind of category. Right? And so for instance, in Blake, in the illustrated poems, one gets lines like this: the tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction. You never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough. Dam braces, bless relaxes. I always loved that one. The crow wished everything was black, the owl that everything was white. So then the question is, what happens when you get to our period? Right? And I'll stop, I'll let other people talk, but I would like to take up the notion of what actually, at some point, happens to collaboration when I think that the computer has intervened, and that people have what I think is an amazing sense of a collaborative effort that they make with the computer. And what does it do to the idea of collaboration?
Shall we sit on that and then go to the video? Philip, do you want to hit the light for me? And then, do you guys want to say anything before you show the video? Just show the video. Basically, we're going to giving you some spice for thought. Yeah. So if you're down here, maybe you want to just kind of move over here. It's about 6 minutes, and then you can move back.
Television junkie. You know, I know people who are television junkies. I'm too busy. I do too many things to be a television junkie. But I do, like I have a day job in a law firm that's very stressful, and I do sometimes come home and just watch TV. And Anne can't even hear television without reacting strongly. And you know, like the other day, my remote control was broken, and, you know, I did go into a bit of a panic.
Again we leave you from within the shadows of the everlasting hills. May peace be with you this day and always.
Finding out that Molly watches television for the exact same reason that I hate television and just never look. And that is we're both equally alienated. And I feel like if I look at that television and find out that this culture is run on commercials and corporate interests, then it will just send me over the edge. So if I don't look, then I'll, stay a little further away from that edge.
We couldn't be more opposite at that point in time. And, yeah. I had a lot of anger, and Anne had a lot of anger. And her anger was at media, and I think my anger was mad at the intelligentsia of the art world.
It did start with friendship between Molly Cleator and myself, and that we shared a studio, and we had a wall between the two of us, so we would always like be yelling things over the wall. We couldn't see each other, we could just hear each other. And so we were used to having this relationship of audio but no see.
And Anne played NPR, and I played, popular music,
Even though I didn't share a common opinion with her, we became friends, like really different. That she's 10 years younger than I am. She's from the West Coast. She grew up in LA, stayed here. I'm from the East Coast. I'm older. I don't watch television. She does watch television. She's a performance artist. I'm like a visual and media artist. All of our differences were overcome by, just exchanging dialogues over the years. So when I was sharing that studio, I had a dream of this project in entirety. Like a name for it, that it was Molly and I, that we would talk about television, we would both be represented by television monitors over motorized wheelchairs.
It was a really big room that was empty. And we put in 165 chairs around the perimeter so that the viewers could sit and watch our chairs, Anne's chair and my chair, which are motorized wheelchairs with our heads on them in video monitors, and we're talking. So our chairs essentially do this dance.
They run around the room all day long on 2 batteries, and they have sensors in the front, and they can see you coming up and fooling around with them, or they can see the chairs that they're about to bump into. They'll stop, they'll back up, and they'll go on their way again. There's 2 different software programs that make the chairs run in different ways. So Molly does these nice oval and figure 8 moves all around the room. She's very graceful, and she's in her green, sofa outfit.
Her chair is black and chrome and narrow, and it's got this foot protruding, and she wanted her chair very black and very hard, and all the insides exposed. Mine are kind of covered, my bowels are covered, but my spine shows. I wanted a little, edge in there. I definitely have a little edge, but I tend to kind of soften things. And hers is very hard and black and belts and, yeah. She has these grips holding your TV, and, yeah. It's very much how, I think, the bottom line is I think both of us feel very alienated as we go through life. And the way I deal with my alienation is to kind of smooth the rough edges and kind of, lay down on a pretty blanket, so to speak. I think the way Anne deals with her alienation is by, fantasizing about, gathering all the homeless people downtown and showing up at City Hall. Like that is of comfort to her.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, now, do you want to show your slides now? Do you want to talk about your collaboration? Why don't you, yeah? You want to talk about another kind of collaboration? Yeah, and then because we're, in a sense, we're getting these 3 very different aspects of ideas of collaboration, and then, well, let's start talking. So now everybody's going to switch to the other side of the room. Ooh, let's kind of move so we can see. There.
I want to preface by saying that as a practicing architect, I believe that architecture is essentially a collaborative act from beginning to end. So what I have is 5 slides that show some of the work that was done that are in a sense of collaborations. These works are done not by myself and the artists, but with a whole group of people. In some cases, I was actually working for Todd Williams, Billy Chan Associates, but being intimately involved in these projects and the design of it. So with that in mind, this is a collaboration project with Mary Miss, and it has to do with a project that was commissioned to us by the American Craft Museum, which asked us to do something as this kind of collaboration between architects and artists. What can we do within the museum walls? When Mary and Todd, Billy, and I sat down, the first thing we asked was, what are we doing in the museum together? And then slowly it got into the point of saying, you know, what do we hate about museums and the kind of display of art? What are our moral implications of showing something in the museum? What are we trying to do? So one thing that we have finally all agreed on is that we hate that do not touch sign. So we started thinking about what is the most sort of touched element within the whole Manhattan. And we decided that it's the public phone. And with that in mind, we decided to make 3 phone booths. So what you see is the phone booths with closed doors. When you open it, there's actually a working public phone within. Ironically, what happened was that the museum guards stopped people from entering and using this. So we ended up having to find out what these numbers are and, you know, assign everyone in the studio to call, you know, every half hour and have these things ring so that someone has to pick it up. But in that process, it was very interesting. It dispelled a lot of myths that I had, my kind of image of what Mary Miss's work was about. I felt like, okay, she's going to be the person who figured out all the nuts and bolts, that she's intimately involved in kind of material selection and how things come together, and it was not. The truth of the matter is that she's very interested in the conceptual part of it, at least for this project. She's ultimately very uninterested in how it was executed. And so this came into the kind of traditional sense of the artist and architect collaboration, where the artist conceptualize, hand it over to the architect figure out how it's done.
I'd like batteries. That'd be good too.
This is a project that was thrown together where we didn't seek the artist didn't seek us, but it was a project done for a client who's an art collector who wanted to add a pool house. And incidentally, she purchased this piece of solid wood, which is the wall drawing from the Pyramid series, and said, what a great idea it would be if we permanently install it. The idea of this piece was that, you know, you can buy the idea and then Saul and his assistants will execute it at any scale, anywhere at 4 feet. So the whole design of the building became a kind of conversation with Saul and his assistants about what is the proportion, what are the pallets within this pool house that would be a fitting kind of counterpart and almost a backdrop to this piece. I just want to show this one detail of almost like a sacrilegious moment where he actually said, yeah, give me a window, just put it right in the middle of this thing. So we did put a window in the middle of this wall drawing. This is a collaboration that was commissioned by the New York Council for the Arts, and it was a collaboration with Dan Graham. What's interesting about this is actually not so much what this piece was, but the fact that Dan Graham shows up unannounced, always at lunchtime, and that sits down and have a conversation with us, that whenever he looks up at you and talk about things, that he would converse in a kind of social way. And then when he had something really serious to say, he would look straight down at the table and start his soliloquy. I think that he was much more interested in a conversation in this project than he was actually about the piece itself. The reason I said that is that this is the outcome of this piece, the form of this piece, is very much what the office was thinking about at the time. There's a lot more investment in the kind of final outcome of this piece from the architects.
What do you think? What do you think? We can probably get the lights. Yes? Or was this the last one?
I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Phil, you want to get the lights? What do you think? Actually, that's great because that actually I'm questioning right away. What do you think that you can sit down?
Okay.
What do you think that his? I'm struck by the notion. Oh, I'm in the wrong chair. Okay. I'm struck by the notion that he was more invested in the conversation than than the actual physical collaboration, and I'm in a sense that's very different than, for instance, what you guys were talking about. And I thought it might be a really interesting place to start up. Why do you think he was? What was it about that conversation that was so interesting to him?
I think he was very much, he was doing the works that were about you've seen a lot of his work that were about these kind of special kind of glass, and the kind of reflection upon reflection, the issue about seeing, viewing, voyeurism, and all the kind of issue that was on his mind, being a hot topic at that time. So what he was interested was to actually find a venue for more experimentation on this kind of glass idea. So that piece was the newsstand bus stop, and it had all these things that actually he was much more interested in.
Was that a true collaboration for you?
It was in a way. In a strange way it was, because it stays separate but parallel. Where I don't think we would have come up with the idea of these glass, which I didn't go into explaining what they did with the enclosure of it and stuff like that, and what it meant to the city to have this particular surface, on the street at that time. Neither was, I don't think he was actually interested in what the canopy, which had a different kind of glass, would have done. So in a way, it wasn't so much a kind of traditional way of collaboration of the kind of melting of the minds, but it was almost like a parallel track and finding a vehicle in which both people's interests are exhibited at the same time. They kind of coexist.
Like parallel processing in a way.
Yeah.
But did his conversations change the piece at all?
Not particularly. I mean, it almost was like a...
Was he talking to himself?
It was mostly talking to himself, but at the same time he was going through all the kind of ideas about all the glass works that he was doing and what it meant and how this glass could be seen as...
So in a sense you were pushing each other, you're just pushing each other in parallel tracks.
He was almost convincing us that was the thing that should be incorporated. Of course we were open to whatever it was, and we threw in certain things like certain things like it should have a map or something like that the architects would care about it. Or it should be out of aluminum. Yes.
Hi, Annie.
Hi.
Can I ask you to comment a little bit on the comment you just made regarding the Mary Miss piece, when you said I think you said something about it in kind of a traditional manner, that the artist in these sorts of situations conceptualizes and then sort of hands the architect, can you make it, can you do it? I mean, I guess my question is that seen by an architect, a person in your position, to be a true collaboration? Is that something that's okay with you? Is that common?
I think it's common. It's not okay with me. Maybe I can segue into answering the question by bringing up a little exercise that Eugenia and I did together after we have done a few projects together. What happened was, in the latest collaboration that we did, which was a proposal for the Staples Center, we've decided jointly that we will write a list of what we expected of each other in our relationship. So we wrote the list and we read it to each other, and we were in shock, because we felt like that we were very open to the process of everyone contributing in any way possible. And what we found out in a nutshell was Eugenia was wanting me to But the thing that was shocking was that I was expecting Eugenia to accept me as a conceptual partner, that I would want to contribute conceptually to this process. But I never wrote for her form or how form came to be. I didn't expect her to contribute in that way.
Can I jump in
And
here for a
then-
minute? Yeah, because it actually, I want to give a little bit more background, because in a sense, I think we're starting to collaborate in a very exciting way that's beyond any of our kind of previous ideas, I think. I don't know, I can't speak for you. And what I was finding happening was that there was this extraordinarily generous partnership and collaboration that was happening, but I felt, and I couldn't say this for the longest time, but I felt like when it actually came to making the form, I was being left out, or I was leaving myself out. It was both. There wasn't a bad guy, but it was such a scary thing to bring it up, to talk about it, because it felt like it was challenging, somehow it was challenging the relationship, or it was challenging the roles in a way that felt outside the bounds. And I actually thought about it and practiced the conversation for like 3 days. I even talked to my therapist about it.
I didn't know that.
But what happened, because it seemed so important, because I was also aware that, I mean, for me, going from being a studio artist to this kind of a collaboration is very exciting, because it's unknown territory. The rules are different. And so also here you are in this brand new territory, in this exciting, anti-Bosnia. and all of a sudden there's this huge problem. What do you do? But what I found is that what we did by talking about it, by Annie's in this very pragmatic sense, Annie said, I come in going, we need to talk about this. And Annie says, why don't we make a list? Why don't we ask? And she comes up with this very architectural next step. And we were both shocked, because in a sense we were leaving ourselves out. The other wasn't leaving us out. We were leaving ourselves out of certain vital parts of the process.
And do
yes.
you think that that's about an assumption on your own part about your own role?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I believe is, because the underlying foundation that we had begun to establish was so generous, that we were able to start deconstructing the nut. And I truly believe that, I've said this a couple times before, but it felt like we were splitting the atom. It felt like all of a sudden everything that we were going to be able to do the work was going to get more interesting, because the process, we were figuring out how to ventilate the process. It was like coming in and saying, oh, here we are, I'm this vanguard artist, she's this vanguard architect, sure, we can have a collaboration, and finding ourselves doing the same old thing, and figuring out how to get out of it.
So basically to recap, is like the architects wanted to contribute conceptually, and the artists wanted to contribute formally. And that kind of traditional territory that we held, that somehow we did not have a kind of dialogue until we came to this point where we realized that we had held on to this kind of very common notion of what we expected of each other. So I thought that was, I think we both thought that was a breakthrough at that point.
Yeah.
Which then, now the next steps that we do actually will be, I think maybe the issue of the labor, maybe this is where the labor really happened in terms of the collaboration, is the kind of investment in the process of the relationship between these two people.
Who asked who to do this?
To do the list?
I asked.
No. How did the idea start? Who started?
I think Eugenia approached me.
Yes, I approached Annie.
Why did you say yes?
Good question.
I had known of Eugenia's work. I've known about her. We were acquaintances, basically.
And we'd done a panel about artist-architect collaboration.
Right. Eugenia had actually invited me to a panel.
A part in the library.
With Bob Irwin and Erica Rothenberg.
Which was like scorched earth. I don't know if any of you were any of you were here, but it was like,
That was a strange one.
yeah, it was like the artist, the male artist and the male architect in the center, kind of whirling so fast that nobody else could permeate the the center. And it was actually in certain ways it was very difficult. But out of that, I had a heightened curiosity about, okay, obviously it's not working most places. Here I am teaching in an architecture school. How can I figure out how to make this work? Mostly, I mean, for intellectual reasons, for work reasons, and also because here's all these architects around me. You know, how can I get more work?
Well, the one of the main reasons that I said yes, you know, out of the respect for the work that Eugenia is doing, but also out of the frustration with these projects that you saw, plus other projects that I didn't show you, the other collaborative processes where I just felt like we didn't get anywhere, that they were, you know, just two sort of separate autonomous entities coexisting in some way, producing an artifact that doesn't really have a content that speaks about how people work together and how it would be such a different thing if they were to.
Just a minute, let me get, because there's a question back here, but let me, what's your question? And then.
Well, it's a sort of a backing up further, which is like whether there's assumptions in this room about collaboration, and that sort of an architect's, most of the group, I think, and I don't even know if that's true, and that whether there's an assumption that the collaboration is an extraordinary thing or an ordinary thing.
Oh, that's an interesting.
And I don't even, because I always think architects is a big firm, the whole group of people, they're all working away, and that's very different than we're the artists and usually actually in our own studios. But you're talking about the sort of the extraordinariness of collaboration, so it seems sort of a mixed message to me.
What do you mean? You mean it's ordinary to you? Is that what you mean?
That there's a big firm of people all working to make something, and yet
I see what you're
You
saying.
know what feels really not unordinary for me is the fact that when you collaborate like that, you're really giving up a whole lot. I mean, for conceptually, that would be a very difficult thing to do, to give up that side of architecture. And that's what I think it's really.
It's both. It's
extraordinary.
Yeah, it's both. What, you know, I think we had this little conversation about what is the, you know, the safety that you feel in the collaborative process is that someone can somehow validify your ideas or your joint ideas, that someone is there to say, yeah, I agree too.
Yeah, that's a really bad idea.
And then, right, bad idea, you know, and it's okay.
We both agree on that.
Right. And then the fallback position on that one will be what we talked about, Anne actually brought that up. I said, sure, that's the case. That there's a fear that I now must attach my name to this thing, that I'm letting go of a certain control and responsibility and the kind of development of that idea, and that's a scary thing. It's a very scary thing too.
Well, what you guys do that? I mean, what? I mean, you do it in a kind of a.
That's what it's about for us.
Yeah,
is
talk about that a little bit.
To create the third thing, to get away from
The
individual, and to include the viewer, the participant in that third thing, to make it about more than just I. That's what the work is about.
Sort of assuming that our differences reflect some kind of difference maybe that's in this room, and that we're going to try to make each of our two arguments so compelling that you're going to really agree with me, and then you're going to really agree with Molly, and then where are you at? Because we disagree. And so you're in the middle, and where is that? It's, well, if she's talking, are you more over on her side, and then you forget your arguments?
Do you worry about who's on your side? Do you worry about
we want to make both sides have equal weight in the final piece. That's one thing that we end up with here.
Howard, what were you thinking?
Yeah, well, I think that
what they're talking about is true. I mean, collaboration is transformative. What Annie, you were mentioning, you're talking about the negative parts. You're going to lose a part of yourself.
Right.
But these two people, or anybody that's collaborating, and I'm not really sure that architects do collaborate. You know, I'll get to that in a minute. I think these people are willing to get to a new place. They're not thinking about they're giving something up, as if they're going to find something new.
Right.
It's the same thing that you do with yourself when you're writing. You say you're wrestling with yourself, and you call that a collaboration. I don't know. I think that's more isolation. It's not a negative thing, but you're wrestling with yourself, and eventually you get to decide what the thing is that you're going to produce, nobody else. It might be a lot of wrestling, and it might be a lot of labor on your part, but eventually you get to decide. But when these two people work, or when we, as architects, we work with other people, if we're really collaborating, we're going to give up a lot of things to get to a new place. Like the thing that you did with Saul LeWitt, I don't think that was a collaboration. You just encased the thing that he did. I mean, is there a dialogue? Did his output change from that? Did your way of building change from that? And I think that's the way mostly that architects work, is they assign parts to do. It's like a partnership. You paint the walls, I'll put the framing up, you know, you do the art, and somebody tries to stand back and say, oh yeah, it all fits together. But nobody's really changed by all that. I think that's the important
But I think
part.
there's collaboration and collaboration in I'm not an architect, so I don't know, but I've been a consumer client, right, in at least two separate occasions, both of them at schools. One of them with, I don't know if I can utter his name here, Christopher Alexander, you know, which was a very painstaking, long, right? I mean, Grace knows more because she was, you know, really laborious process in which I actually came, I thought to, you know, read his books and came to learn something more about architecture and thought I was involved in the process. And the second was at the college where I teach, where there was, I think, the illusion, you know, that of collaboration, and that collaboration, if I understand it right, is almost a kind of gambit, you know. There is this way you feel that you are, as the client, involved in this kind of collaborative process that turned out to be a kind of collusive process for me. And then the building went up, you know. There was the building. I said, well, what about this? What happened to, you know, and what's the shtick about?
Your input.
You know, and your input became output, you know, your ingress became his egress, you know.
You're just feeding information.
Yeah, and it wasn't into somebody else, right, did this. So I think, so from those two were amazingly different experiences in terms of some feeling, at least, some perception I had, at least, of what I was doing. Yeah?
To me, that's more like hiring a designer, though.
Then rather than a true collaboration.
Like I hire, as head of Freeways, I hire designers to do things for me, and it doesn't feel the same as when I'm working with Molly.
I think that where we're starting to get now is we're starting to get to a real artist-architect collaboration, and I think, it's also informed for me. I was thinking about this afternoon because it's also. It's for me, it's coming out of a long process of being a studio artist, and I almost feel as if there's a certain amount of intense knowledge that I get just by working by myself in a studio, which may be true for an architect working in an office, pushing the envelope in a way that there's no map, and it's some of the most terrifying work that I could ever think about doing. And there's certain things that I learn there that I can't learn anywhere else. But what I'm finding is that there's other things that can't be learned there, but can be learned here, that are equally as terrifying, that I have to give up whole new things to do, that I have to give up that ability to be the conceptual God, in a way. But what my suspicion is that what I'm gaining is far larger. That it's a matrix. It's knowledge coming from the boundaries that you know, the energy that is loosed, and the correlation of minds. I mean, we did a piece we got our first piece with public art, and and we were going to take more interviews, and they called us up and asked us not to do any more interviews because they thought we were going to get them all hands down. Because I think there's something really interesting about being able to take down the boundaries that you're talking about. It's not easy. But one of the things, I mean, but you do it probably in a different way, and you talk about collaboration in a different way. I mean, I'm still, because I think the way you're thinking about being with the muse is, in a way, I don't know, is it the same kind? I mean, it's like being, for me, it's like being in the studio, and that is a collaboration, but it's a collaboration with kind of the scariest part of yourself and your culture in a way.
I think writing is in a different category.
Yeah.
I don't think that I ever could collaborate again.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think that I actually could.
With Ivan, if Ivan called you up, Ivan?
No, I don't think I could, because what's happened is I have my own vision, and my own perspective, and I was thinking about this, and my daughter and I were talking about this, for people who don't like to be criticized, they seem to go into art, and into writing. I mean, I can't stand. I mean, I know that I had the wrong parents to do this, but I can't stand to have someone say that this, talk with self is not collaboration. What the hell is he talking about? This is not nice to do to me on television. So, and for me, I know that part of early collaboration for me was that I didn't have to take all the shit myself. But there's a way that I don't know if I could actually do it again. I like doing it myself now, with
What was
myself.
the result of your collaborating? You said some of them weren't so good, you got victimized, but the good ones,
Oy,
what was the result?
The good ones? The good ones is, I'll tell you the story about one of the good ones. I did with a person that I had gone to graduate school with, that I went to graduate school with, that I did the New York Times crossword puzzle with every day. We ate lunch together. I slept at his house. We taught together and lived next door to each other in Carbondale in southern Illinois. We lived next door to each other when we came back here. And we wrote this book together and about black writers, an edition about black writers in 18th century England. Not that there were so many, it was a very small book, but nonetheless there were three that came over on slave ships that were totally illiterate, that learned to read and write and became friends with Pope and Johnson. I mean, it was spectacular, and they got lost in history sometime we did this. But it was such an amazing collaboration for me, and so transformative, that we got one of these questions one time, maybe some people in the room have got it, where someone comes up to you and says, look, it's okay if it's true, but can I ask you a question, It's okay, it's fine with me, I can handle it, This is okay, I don't make these kind of things, but are you guys lovers? But it was that, there was this kind of intimate, and in that collaborative effort, a kind of intimate, very sensual and sort of erotic experience of writing together. And the same thing was true with Illich. We did every sentence together, and we walked lots of the sentences in Mexico or in fire trails up here, But those two worked really well. When I did it I did a book with a colleague who was a biologist. I did a book about bears are real important in the Middle Ages, with this book on bears. It wound up in court. And in fact, that it's that collaborative efforts now with writers particularly, it becomes so litigious that there are lawyers who do nothing but, who do property law, intellectual property law. And that's where this wound up. We fed lots of New York lawyers out of this.
Who got credit for what? Is that what they're
Exactly. No, whose ideas are whose, and whose sentences are whose. And once you put sentences together in a chapter in a book, where did my ideas go, and where did yours stop, and who do they belong to? And can I pluck
But aren't those the wrong questions? Aren't those the questions?
Yeah, they're absolutely the wrong. That's the wrong thing, and one should not. You can't go into it that way if that's whose water is this in the pool, yours or mine?
Huh?
The worms.
The worms, yes, and the worms,
Well,
the worms,
Molly wanted to
the
talk
worms
about
in the
the
can.
worms.
Just a minute, I wanted, Judith, you had a
This is really off the subject now, but I think there, I'm sure Annie's had this experience. Architects do successfully collaborate. Is that your experience?
In every project.
Where something more than, okay, no matter how good you are and how much you love what you're doing, and how strong you feel, that somehow when two people get together, or sometimes even more, but people, something more than either could have created is created.
Absolutely.
Only
And-
under a certain
concept, yeah.
contract, which is to say that those two people coming together have a certain respect for each other.
Absolutely, and they're absolutely equal. And- and
Not so
I'm-
much equal, but
well,
that
I don't
they-
mean equal, but
yeah.
I mean, I don't mean the same either,
Right.
I mean, different, and not necessarily equal, because it could be an employer-employee,
Mhm.
but only if there's mutual respect, because I was
Right.
thinking, I've had
Right.
experiences in working with other people.
Right.
They paid me,
Right.
but I didn't hesitate to say anything, I didn't hesitate to do anything, I didn't hesitate to say, you're wrong, no, don't do that that
Exactly.
way. You have to be completely free to have two people come together, and something can be.
Which is the big lie in architecture, that we still have the stars. You know, that the work still is tagged to one name, and I know the artists have the same issue, you know, the critics want to have one name. But
Not just the critics.
Not just the critics, the public wants to have one name.
Yeah.
It's
Some
very,
tag to it.
yeah, I mean,
That's the part of the worms,
yeah,
actually.
because
Yeah.
I've been working,
Does anybody want to come sit up here? There's like this big void up here. Okay, go.
I've
I'm
been
sorry.
working collaboratively since 1979, not with Anne, but it's been of interest to me in all my years of art making. And Judith was, I made a magazine with an artist named Alicia Shapiro, and that was started in 1979. Then I worked with a group called Hangers out of Claremont, and then I out of that did a lot of performance work with a few different people, one of whom was Lynn Hickson. And at the time, she decided to stop being a performer and be the director. That would be her collaborative participation. Well, not only did the critics want to call it Lynn Hickson's work, but the art community, the viewers, if you were a performer in the work, you were a performer. And this is an interesting thing, I think, historically, just about performers and their class and directors and their class. And that, of course, I think, well, you want to say something about that?
No, I was just clearing my throat.
Oh, okay.
Everything's not a collaboration, Molly.
What's that?
Everything's not a collaboration.
Yeah, I knew that. And, but anyway, it's just been really interesting about how the art world wants to assign authorship. You know, critics.
But the art world is about selling art. I mean, it's almost, you have to be very careful. I think we have to be very careful about what we call the art world. I mean, are we talking about the artists?
What distinction?
Huh?
What distinction do you want to make?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think.
I guess I was distinguishing it from architecture.
Oh.
But I mean, I have not found anybody who doesn't have trouble viewing collaborators as a team. We have been working together for 10 years, and we constantly have to ask people to put both our names when they write it down.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
That's how
Under
clear.
every condition, on lists, on titles, on...
They put Anne Bray's name first because her name ends with a B, and my name ends with a C. Trust me. I mean, it's
Well, we apply
profound.
for
It's
panels.
staggering.
and
It's
a lot of, like, for residencies and panels and for grants.
oh, we
and
apply
the-
for grants, and we've
they
sent
have big
grants off,
doubts.
and they come back and they say only one person can apply. We can't give you 2 times the money. And then we call and we say, we're not asking for 2 times the money. We are a collaborative team applying for this grant.
And they say, oh.
Is that the worms that you're talking about? Is
That's
that
part of the work.
Yeah.
Big part.
Yeah. But
That I wish the art world were a little more accepting of collaboration. That it seems to have a...
They are on a level. If you're married to your partner and your name is Christo or Harrison.
but I don't think
that
that's
seems to be
That's not
a
so
vogue
easy
right
either.
now. Mr. and Mrs. seems to do really
Well, we actually have a married couple right here who collaborate together.
But we
Right.
don't go by Mr.
No.
and Mrs.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a third generation artist, she uses her name, has always used her name, I have my name, we have a third name. We do see the collaboration as transformative. It is something that we risk a great deal initially. The concern when we started more than 20 years talking about it was that are we risking too much? We have a long-term life relationship that precedes the idea of being a collaborative art couple, and that was not an easy risk to take. We had an individual art career preceding that by a good 10, 15 years before we started a third artist. Interestingly enough, historically, when we applied Yaddo, which was where we chose to birth this third artist, we had to make individual applications. We couldn't make a joint application. We each had to apply individually, be accepted, and even that caused a riot. We later was told that we caused one of the most controversial discussions that ever took place in the peer panel review, because there was tremendous opposition to the idea of a husband and wife coming together, which at Yaddo they give you individual times, not through the first husband and wife that were there at the same time. And they isolated us from the community, which was interesting. They gave us a house that was unto ourselves, which was very nice and all. I mean, we loved having Carson McCullers' house. And it was kind of interesting to have to beat the writers away so we could work, because they all wanted to come visit and just be in the house. But they it was a problematic issue in the late 70s. I don't think those same concerns are here today.
Well, we're saying that we're still running into it. We didn't create a third name, and we were sort of conscious of that and knew that was an option.
Well, a friend of mine did create a third name, and it's called Goat Island, but her name as the director still is in larger print.
Well, we intentionally went in to create a third entity. Our intent was to create a third entity that we thought would be sort of the sum is greater than the parts.
Right.
I mean, do you think this is a cultural change? Do you think this is something that's always been, or do you think that we're changing our notions of authorship? I mean, are we, is this, yeah, I'm thinking.
I like the digital,
Yeah.
I like that you introduced a real interesting issue when you sort of at the end there threw in the digital domain and the computer, because I think it is changing. I think the nature of creation.
And maybe the nature of how you can get, or how you build information, how you generate information. We have more ways of generating information, and we understand that we can do it individually, but that there's also this matrix that is available. There's this very interesting physicist, Schwartz, who says that actually matrix theory is the most important physics of the 20th century, but because it's because of the military-industrial complex, he used kind of 60s terms, he says that it really hasn't been followed out. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, I'm wondering whether it's a cultural meme that we're sort of struggling through, or whether it's just something that's always been, or that, I mean, you talked about collaboration being a 19th century term. And actually we talked when we had our pre-conversation, I think you said that there really isn't a word, or one of us said there really isn't a word for the kind of working together that, for instance, that you're doing or that we're doing. I don't know, true or false,
No,
Dr. Sanders?
I have a different category for
Okay.
$200. I don't know. But I think that's probably the most interesting thing for me, is the whole notion of, cyberspace and cohabitation of the mind, but which is another issue, but you could have
Is it another issue, or is it an evolution?
Well, I think it's a real issue, but I was going to say something to Howard about what even with tons of megabytes, right, in a machine, because I'm still fixed on this. How did this one go bad? This collaboration. It was still down to. I always thought when two names appeared on a book, for instance, that the and coupled those two people, the way Hemingway couples ideas with and. But this person with whom I did this book asked if his name could go first because it was slightly out of alphabetical order, and for him, it became much more important, right? And the way that he flipped out was, Grace and I were at a poetry reading, and someone mentioned this book, which is called The Sacred Paw, and mentioned only my name. And he wanted to know what the hell was going on. Mm? But this is the prelude to maybe a discussion we could have about electronic revolution. But still, I think, even in the midst of a huge electronic revolution, the ego is real powerful, you know?
Yeah.
The ego puts out a lot of megahertz, I think, you know? It's amazing. But that's how it went. It went that way, you know?
Callie, what do you want to say?
Well, I want to say, I was saying to Molly and everyone earlier that I think people are afraid of collaboration because it's a lot closer to revolution. It's a lot closer to a group or even a cult, which is really scary. And I mean, if you can imagine a lot of people collaborating, that's really powerful and scary. And I was thinking how the word collaboration is almost a reverse of itself. Because if you could imagine everyone collaborating, that would just be a oneness, which is almost the opposite of collaboration.
Well, I think actually, I think talking about you talking about Chinese culture and how the group is a god in a way. Isn't that what you said? Yeah. So that I mean, in a sense that's what I mean. One of the really fascinating things for me this semester is I have a student who comes from China, comes from Taiwan, and we're getting all of this information about Chinese thinking, and it actually the idea that the group is God in a certain kind of way is accessing a certain kind of what you're saying as well. I mean, and I think in a very maybe in a slight way, when we really get going in this room, there's I mean, it's almost like a group mind. It's like it's you know, I mean, what's that? Has been. Yeah, has been. I mean, it's
in opposition to the individualism that this culture is permeated with.
And I think that happens when you focus on something outside of the ego. In other words, when you're in it for something else, when you're in it to create something greater than self, when you're thinking only about the good of the project, when you're thinking only about the work itself. How good can it be? What can you do? How can you make it more than?
And why is that so extraordinary? The part that's so weird to me.
I'm sorry to say that doesn't seem extraordinary to me at all.
Well,
there is an egolessness to it.
But does the ego kind of, does the immune system of the ego kick in at a certain point and get and start? I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Well, what do you two do? You feel like you're doing what you said, that you're collaborating, losing your ego toward an end, or more exhibiting your individualized ego and not worrying that you're not gaining, power over each other with that?
I feel like I get challenged from a new position that I would never get. I can't challenge myself from that position because it's me asking me my own questions. It's such a loop. And Molly can ask me stuff that is just like another level of truth. It's like down, another one, down one. And then I'm always up in my head and she'll ask me about my heart. And it's like, oh, right, well, there's that truth too.
It's like the list that you were reading, the list of animals, that they're kind of forced to look at a different kind of list than the one that they usually think about. And then come
this
up
is
with
the kind of
new
de-collaboration I was talking about that precedes the collaboration.
That is.
Now I understand what you were talking about more. I was really mystified by what you were doing there.
That's extra. To be mystified costs extra.
Yeah, great.
I think we're circling around something here that I thought Barry was going to say, and he mentioned it at home, and that's another idea of collaboration. I mean, collaboration is a pejorative as well. And we're forgetting that. And so there is this...
How is it a collaboration? I mean, how is it pejorative?
Collaborateur. And that raises the question about whether or not, for me, when I talked about this, pillow talk is a kind of collaboration, that whether or not you can actually have, somebody said it back here, whether or not you could actually have collaboration with someone with whom you do not feel equal. I'm not sure that it's possible to do, but the sense of, like you said something about having collaboration with an employer, an employee, or something like that, I think it was, but I'm not sure that could work unless you really feel that you're absolute equal. And the notion of collaborateur, of collaborating with the enemy, I think is a real interesting power relationship.
I mean, if I can speak for the architects too, in architecture, the reason that Howard, I said that architecture is essentially collaborative, and maybe someone can dispute me on that, is that once you accept, let's say, even a commission, right, where someone is beginning to voice their desire of some kind of vision, and you begin to then work with either people within your own studio or the engineer who put their input into it, or the lighting designer, or, you know, the maker of certain things, whatever, you cannot just reject those ideas, but you have to accept it to a certain degree, and that acceptance transforms what your own vision is. Is like having another truth presented to you from an aspect, from a level that you cannot get to. So for me, architecture is completely collaborative, from the smallest project to the largest project.
Do you think you're unusual in that?
No.
No.
No, I just think, I'm agreeing with Judith that, you know, it does not have to come from an equal position. So the employer, employee, and blah, 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 you know, all these other people will come from different positions, as long as there's a certain level of respect, and maybe the respect has to be equal.
Yeah,
But you know,
clearly true, that respect has to be.
I think on top of it, there also has to be, first of all, a vision which is unified, which all the people involved want to go towards. And then there has to be a common set of values that each individual has. And then to me, once the hierarchical attitudes are broken down and gotten rid of, then each individual's talents can come out separately and contribute to the whole, making the whole a very different thing.
But Anne just said something really interesting. She said their values aren't the same.
Yeah.
And we
that.
don't go to
That's
this
the kind of
unified
ideal.
position. It's sort of like, that was my idea of collaboration before we started, and then we started saying, no, we're not going toward this, and we don't have common values. It's just a negotiation between an apple and an orange.
yeah, I mean, I don't feel equal with anybody. I don't feel equal, I don't trust people, I don't feel respected, I mean, you know, I'm walking around, you know, a neurotic mess or whatever, but
Have I got a doctor for you?
I'm handling it, you know, and life goes on. But I mean, that's what interests me, you know, that's where I wanted to enter this. She said, do you want to talk? I said, yes, I would. She says, do you watch TV? I said, yes, I do. She says, I don't. Let's talk. And that's where I wanted to enter, because that's how I feel always. I don't know anybody here. I don't know, you know, and I'm discovering myself through that dialogue. But I don't want to do the work about me. I want to do it about that dialogue.
Why?
Because I think, referencing that tape, I think I have issues with equality and arrogance and better than and less than. And I think graduate school really ignited them for me. And so this was a solution at that moment. And I am continuing to do
We
it.
started this.
But she spoke to you like a person, right? She wanted to talk to you.
That's correct.
And she would listen to you, and you had something
I
to
wasn't
say.
convinced of that.
Well, but she did.
I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't.
But quickly you probably were. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone on.
No.
I mean, she wanted to say something.
No.
You were really a
Go
jerk,
5
you know.
years before- No, she's not convincible.
I mean, wouldn't you?
Are we going to step out and say, take over, Jack?
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling kind of warm now that we're talking about, you know, difference. No, but, I mean.
Going Wally.
You know, I don't know.
But you have different values, but you have a common ethics.
We do. That is correct.
And the ethics is that you both want a certain level of self-actualization. You want to learn something, and you think that you're going to learn something from this process, right?
I don't know, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
We just never have answers. Never.
It's all about
It just goes question after question
Yeah.
to the next one, and it's, like it's 9 years old, where we just keep
asking.
Yeah, I think that's a difference. I think maybe there's different kinds of collaboration, but as architects, I mean, I share what you say, but and it's like what this gentleman's saying, it's a kind of an ideal thing. We all agree to go in this direction, but what if somebody comes up with an idea out here? Most times you find out that's disruptive. Look, we're all going this way.
Right.
Why do you have to step out there? Why don't you collaborate with them over there?
Right.
I really admire what they're doing because they don't really know where they're going.
At all.
And that's the point. If they were by themselves, they have this single vision, but they're always finding new stuff. That's the risky part, and that's why in one sense, architects really aren't open to that kind of risk. Individually, I think they are, but when they get in a group, everybody just kind of starts fighting for control of it, or agreeing that, this is the direction we're heading for the target over there. So I think there's a lot of things that could come in that get excluded.
But then when you start talking about an artist-architect collaboration, that there is going to be more of this kind of difference. I mean, because I think the strategy of the artist. I mean, I'm constantly challenging myself. I'm constantly going against myself. I mean, it's part of my strategy. It's part of, I don't want to call it a strategy. It's part of the
when
the
you're
job.
when you're working solo, or you're talking about right
No,
now?
yeah, I'm talking about. I'm talking about it at any point.
Okay.
I'm talking about it at any point. I think I'm probably more comfortable. No, that's not true, because I think I'm still the most challenging to myself. But actually, I've learned part of collaboration for me, because I'm also doing these big, the kitchen table, which Judy was a part of, or the Book of Lies, which Lisa, which we're collaborating even closer, and that Barry is a part of as well. And part of what I'm thinking that I'm having to learn is to be that exigent, to turn it over, to keep the rototiller, going in all of those directions, which is to me not what my acculturization is, not what my socialization is, and not why, in certain ways, why I think I chose to this focus of being an artist, because I can do that without having to answer to anybody, without having to make excuses to anybody, without having to apologize to anybody. Lisa, yeah.
Don't you think, though, that architecture has a very historic premise for collaboration that is sort of birthed out of necessity? I mean, one person can't possibly be doing all these things. And sort of by virtue of the history of the thing that's existed for a long time, everybody kind of knows their job. Everybody kind of knows everything. And in fact, it's a collaboration, but it's sort of, and I don't mean to degrade it, but it's almost like a pat collaboration. We all know what we have to do, and we're all going in
Is
the
it
same
really as
direction.
pat? I don't know. I would.
Pretty well defined.
Is it?
I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
But I think for artists, what I'm finding is interesting in my own evolution, it almost seems like I am needing to have a collaborative, there's something in me that I have a need now. I have worked so long in isolation, as I'm sure most artists do, to evolve themselves until they're kind of steady. And then it's either a matter, it flips around, it gets boring, it gets lonely, it becomes disenfranchised, I can't ask myself the questions I need to ask. I really am dying to have collaboration now. And sometimes I think that maybe architects would like to not have so much collaboration, because it's sort of the way they're birthed into the world. It's kind of normal for them. I don't know, I'm just...
Hildegard, go ahead, I'm sorry, go.
Do you think Lisa, do you think the net would help you, internet would help you in that regard? Could you use it for that?
I do all the time.
But it doesn't work, doesn't help you?
Yeah, it does.
But I think there's a fleshy part of collaboration. You said that. The fleshy part of collaboration is really important. I mean, that's the part that's really scary. That's the part
The
where...
immediacy is sort of what I need. You know what I mean? And Eugenia and I have these kind of, I don't know what they are yet, but there's something.
Yeah. See, I think, to answer Dennis, I think that people need the fleshiness more than ever now. the fleshiness of collaboration
I do too.
more and more.
The more you use
farther
the
and farther we
internet,
get
the more you need collaboration.
And maybe.
The more you use the internet, the
No,
more
I
you
do, I
need
think that
collaboration.
you know, I don't know, that's a long shtick, but I do think it comes partly in the 19th century because of this sense at a moment when people do feel like they're disappearing. I mean, I think there's been a long process of our giving away parts of our humanness, and I think it comes at a very particular time
I do
that
too. I
when
agree.
people needed to feel like a twin.
And maybe to follow that up a little bit, Barry, is that it's almost like art is disappearing now in a certain way. I mean, two things are happening. I mean, I had about an hour free time before tonight, and I went out and I went to some of the galleries, and it was well, two things happened. And one was it was really upsetting. Because there was like nobody home. But the other thing, there was this other thing that was happening where the people like Mariko Mori and Matthew Barney, where all of a sudden the production values, the ensemble, which is maybe another part of what we're talking about, where I don't know if the architects are familiar with these guys, that they're Mariko Mori is she's a daughter of and the guy who owns Sony, and she's doing these like $1 million shape-changing productions, and in a sense, I think they're interesting, perhaps. Or Matthew Barney, who's doing these movies and changing himself and changing his flesh and doing all these kind of lurid costumes, and is that another part of what we're talking about, or is that?
Or is that more spectacle?
I don't know.
Oh, I went and saw the Matthew Barney movies, and everyone was saying Matthew Barney, Matthew Barney, Matthew Barney. Then I went and saw him.
Which is single name.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I sat through 10 minutes of credits. I thought, oh, what did they do?
Yeah.
Who are they?
Yeah.
Where do they live, and what's their name?
Yeah.
That I was kind of wondering,
So, which is what I started to go back to earlier when you said the art world, and to me, I make this differentiation because I think there's like artists, and there's this, which is what I grew up understanding what was the art world, and then there's the marketing apparatus of the art world, which needs those single names, which needs those persons. I mean, I've never had a problem recognizing the two of you as collaborators. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
But what is that? What is that? Why do we need a single name? I mean,
I don't think
marketing?
I think it's about selling. I think it's about this whole really scary, horrifying, confused question about how art intersects with our totally material culture.
I mean, I think Callie's point is really well made in this issue.
And the other interesting thing to me was I went to the Baryshnikov performance, and there were. And as soon as he lifted his finger, the audience was like, "Bravo, bravo, bravo!" And it was like they were so excited about how great he was, and that they were getting to experience his greatness, and that's why they wore their fur coat that evening, even though it was a little warm outside. and that they were making him great so that they could experience his greatness. And it seemed more mirroring themselves than it was about
Or is
him.
it witnessing greatness? Is it witnessing greatness in sort of an historical sense? I was there. I saw this historical.
Yeah, and they wanted it to rub on them.
But Hildegard, you had something to say, and you got kind of rushed right by.
Kind of struggling between team and collaboration.
Thanks for explaining. I didn't get.
I think teams have to struggle with all these questions too, and how do they deal with it, and do they really have to give up their individuality, and how do they relate?
When you say team, what are you thinking about? What?
Well, in cooperation, they all become one. I mean, they don't become one, but they have a new goal, they have a new vision, and they hopefully bringing their strengths to follow.
Microsoft might be an interesting
Well,
Saturn might be more interesting.
Yeah, both, actually, yeah.
or Intel, or,
Yeah.
but they hopefully bring their strengths to produce something bigger than they are. And I think architects are teams, I think.
Well,
More
back
than
to,
collaboration.
Lisa's, thing that, there has been a structure established. There were titles for the structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, the project designer, the project architect. They all have titles. They have certain roles, right? Whereas, I think in a true collaboration that has not have a defined structure yet, when you can't really point to certain things and say, that was your idea, that was my idea, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I see that as a kind of in a truer sense of collaboration, because the roles are now not so defined, that you cannot assign accountability to one versus another. But I want to get back to...
It's kind of sad that it comes to accountability. I mean, you collaborate with somebody to come up with some new, bigger idea. That seems to me more important than...
That's the common ethics, I think, in the collaboration process, is that both of you want something greater than, what one person can come up with. And it's not so much like, an architectural program where, there's a kind of quantifiable thing at the end that has to be built for a certain amount of money and blah, blah, blah. I actually want to get back to this issue about why there's only one name. And I think we talked about it, the substitute of the God as presented as a singular entity. And that, we're constantly looking for the stars, the celebrity, the one genius. I mean, if God were two people or something like that, maybe then it would be fine, then we would...
Mrs. God.
Right, then we would not like the collaboration of three people.
Right. There's an author to everything. The need for an author to everything.
So it's a Judeo-Christian God, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's the kind of format of the
That's
ultimate
interesting.
entity.
Do you find that in Hinduism then, with multiple gods like that? Is that the same
That would be an
mindset?
interesting thing to find out.
Yeah, or is there a kind of multiplicity of views because of that? And certainly in Hinduism, I wonder if it manifests in other ways.
In Hindu architecture.
Indian architects, the architects in India, they collaborate in a different way because of that, but they have a more multiple kind of view.
Maybe. I mean, that would be a very interesting thesis problem for someone. I also am interested in collaboration, I think, now that I had a few years to think about it, because of the culture that I was brought up in, where the group takes precedence over the individual. And then half of my life I spent in the United States, and I got this whole dosage of the individualism, which I think we all go to therapy for this one reason: is the group better or is the individual better? That's a whole American burden. Dilemma. It's like we know that the group has a certain thing going for it, but we're asked to be, fighting by ourselves, and the ego and all this stuff. But I think in a way, my background in my culture made it okay for me to,
that's very interesting.
be able to kind of come together with someone, because I've been taught that was the better deal in the end.
And maybe that also helps us to make the better deal, because that knowledge, that kind of that there's a structure in there. It's almost like the Judeo-Christian. It's the opposite of the Judeo-Christian in a sense.
Well, maybe they had that in the Middle Ages, where big church building and that kind of thing.
That's right,
Everything
absolutely.
that lasted so long.
Everything.
That there wasn't one person that was like continuous through the whole process. The culture, the society participated. It was probably more of a collaboration.
There's much more communal effort going on, pilgrimages,
communal
guilds,
effort.
craft guilds,
Right.
building. Except there were individuals who stood out. I mean, there were master masons, and there were, by Chaucer's time, there were people with names who were authors. But as you move farther back, anonymous is the most heavy-duty author. Yeah.
And that is related to our problems with community at this moment. that seem to be peaking at the same moment that our inability to collaborate, comfortably.
Do you think it's possible to collaborate with a community?
I think that's what public art is all about.
I think public art is all about that.
So, when we're talking about those issues of hierarchy and power, though, how does an artist who supposedly has certain things to bring deal with community members who may not identify with an artist or may not even feel that they want it? How does that?
They don't get the commission.
Well, today they don't, but 30
They
years
used to.
ago they did, and there were a lot of problems that went along,
Right.
and then the process evolved, and a lot. What the process now is more, public art is more of a group process, that the dynamics of the full nature of the art being placed in the community is now a voice. The community became a voice because they objected and wanted to redefine the boundaries of what was acceptable and not acceptable within their own community. A lot of what we're talking about, if there's a thread through a lot of the parallel discussions, I think group process is a microcosm that actually is very applicable to any number of different things we've kind of been talking about. Your Mary Miss piece that you took into the Crafts Museum was very interesting in the sense that you chose to redefine the boundary of museum at two different levels. The kinesthetic, the please touch, and then you broke the taboo of the auditory by reading the phone. So sound is very problematic in the museum world, and yet audio is one of the hottest, edgy things right now, and the museum field doesn't know how to deal with it. The process of a group, a healthy group, will eventually kill the concept of God, and the group, each member becomes a piece of, takes the piece of the God, and then we have a healthy group, and we have healthy functionalities. We as artists are always been self-defined or helped along to define ourselves as boundary definers. We're functional deviants. We go and push out the edge of a boundary to help redefine the field.
We're more comfortable with ambiguity.
Than the average individual, sure. And we are redefining the field, and the field of art is being redefined. Installations, productions, collaborations, these are new kinds of things for the art field. And what is art is an interesting issue, or what is art going to be tomorrow? Because it's certainly what it is today is not what it was yesterday or last year. And what is the realm of the digital? And what part is that?
What about this idea? What you were talking, you talked about cohabitation, about cerebral cohabitation. Is that, do you think that's group process? Do you think that's, is that, where were you going with that?
I don't know what group process necessarily. I mean, I know the
Okay,
phrase,
well,
but I don't.
And just separate from group process, cerebral cohabitation. I thought that was a very interesting.
We did this before, and people got upset. But my own recent writing is about the fallout from computer technology and what effect it has on things like the self or interior landscape, or somebody being a being and having reflective analytical powers and all of that. And for me, it's terribly destructive. I mean, we can have that argument, but for me, it's awful. You know? And it's awful at the level for me of being at my college and having fewer people come down and what used to be talk, take place with me, fleshy talk where they look at my nose and easy object to find and talk to me, So, so that's why I raised the question about does collaboration take the place for us of something that we really feel is needed, some sense of self or being, or some kind of fleshy connection of being together, and
kind of an intimacy.
Some kind of sense of intimacy. But what we have at the college right now, and this is what the idea of group process, that phrase probably has changed also, don't you think, over the last probably decade or 15 years, from T groups to something else. I mean, I remember when my mother died and we went to the funeral home, the guy who was behind the desk asked if I wanted to be in contact with a grief manager, if I knew about grief management, which I thought was an outlandish notion. At our school, we have someone now who works full-time as a conflict resolution. I think as a consequence, nastiness has gone up 8 points at our place. You know, it just has. We just, for the very first time in the history of the college, fired somebody, got rid of somebody who had tenure for ripping things off another colleague's door, and they put up a hidden camera to find this person and found out who it was. And the person in conflict resolution said, "How come they didn't come to me?" Right? Just about a $400,000.
So what is a grief manager to manage not to have grief?
No, it teaches you how, in fact, to express, or maybe the word is ventilate, your grief.
But isn't that what you're saying? They're just telling you how to manage not to have grief.
How to not
have conflict.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the whole purpose.
So, so that for me, collaboration. I wanted to set that down in the context of cyberspace. You know, I think that. Well, anyway, that's. A pie in the face for Bill Gates seemed to me to be such a nice, fleshy thing in the midst of, you know, the kind of testimony he's giving.
I thought it was public art.
Yeah? How did you think it was public art?
Well, it just was so outrageous, and it
What's
was
it?
the pie in his face.
Uh-huh.
I just thought it was.
These are guys actually who evidently do this in lots of right?
Guerrilla theater,
Professional pie throwers.
Professional pie throwers. They're probably called PPTs soon. I know there is a phrase for it. Right?
So I kind of want to see us kind of stir up the shit a little bit. I mean, I don't want us to get too peaceful here.
Well,
Come on, you guys. You're very good at.
What she said something that artists feel comfortable with ambiguity. Is that what you said? Yeah, I don't. And I'm an artist. I don't feel comfortable with ambiguity at all. I constantly am in discomfort. I mean, ambiguity is uncomfortable, but I think that's why I make art. But I don't make it from a place of comfort. I'm very uncomfortable. So, if that stirs any shit, that was.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking. I guess what I was thinking about the process that the two of you have described. Yes, and it just I mean, it sounds like there's this real discursive process that the two of you have developed, and I just wanted to just kind of see if I could induce a little bit out. I mean, maybe it's.
I think that fleshiness is really scary. And I'm scared of it. And when I work with Anne, we go there and it's scary. And I
Which is not to say it's bad. You're just saying it's scary.
What's scary about it?
I like it.
Yeah.
I like to be scared.
You like?
Well, life is scary. So
Scary means that you're really being challenged and you can feel it.
I guess with consciousness, with some awareness, some direction. Yes, I'm choosing to go here, and it's scary. And I'm going to go here with her. And we're going to make this, and we don't even know what it is. That's ambiguity.
I was wondering if we would even be here having this conversation if our education system, the way that we were educated, was not one that touts the individual. You know, we have the grading system which pitch an individual against an individual. How often at the kind of kindergarten, elementary level do children come together and make a group project or whatever? I mean, I kind of now want to throw this, you know, kind of accusation to the way that we were educated, that this is not a kind of process that just is natural, that people do want to come together and they want to share a dialogue and you know,
and maybe because there's some fear is automatically involved.
Yeah, maybe
Someone?
fear. I mean, it's scary. It is scary. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's, but what I also think is that maybe there's this, what we're describing or what we're talking about is this kind of inarticulate, now you two have articulated this movement, but almost an inarticulate movement toward more of that, away from just the individuated experience and the individuated act of creation. Frank, what you were back there?
Oh, I was just going to say that it's Molly just refuted herself in saying of the business about not liking ambiguity and not being ambiguous, but the whole life of the artist that she described is based on trying to resolve ambiguities.
Right. But what I said is I'm not comfortable with it.
But that doesn't mean that you're not in that state.
Correct. I'm always in that state.
Yeah.
That's why I make art. But I'm not comfortable with it.
Nobody said, no, that wasn't.
I disagree. She said.
I guess I used the word comfortable.
Yeah, she said comfortable. So I just said, oh, I'm not comfortable.
We engage with it in a way that maybe isn't comfortable, but the society at large probably doesn't have that necessarily a desire to engage with them.
Oh, okay.
Maybe is a better way of putting it.
Yeah, because I do it because I'm uncomfortable with it.
Well, but see, but you could just deny it. You could just ignore it, which is what a lot of people do.
You want to deal with it.
You engage it. You're uncomfortable with it. First, you have to be aware that you're uncomfortable with it. Then you have to be willing to take it on. So you're very brave. You're saying, well, you know, I mean, that's a very brave stance.
That's nice to call it brave, and I thank you for that, although I don't know how to not have it.
Don't you see it that way? She isn't describing your...
I'm not consciously aware of being brave.
Well, I think you have to be aware of being brave to be brave.
Okay. I'll take brave on.
What about you guys? I've got this whole class of students over here that's going to engage in a collaborative project, don't you?
We do have one.
Oh, you have over here. What? Oh, yes, Callie, go.
I wanted to tell Molly and Ann that something that I find so amazing and fascinating about your collaboration is that I feel in a weird way that getting along leads to meanness in a way, and I don't know if it's because I grew up in a Jewish family of arguing, but I always feel really suspect when people are getting along, and I feel as long as we're arguing, then our ears are still open. As soon as you're getting along, it's scary to have made up your mind on an issue. That for me leads to meanness, to have made up your mind and not be arguing anymore. That's terrifying and atrophy, in my opinion, and I really admire that you guys are willing to argue all the time.
Thanks.
Catholic and Protestant.
We're actually going to do the history of that war.
That's what you
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we want to go to Ireland and England and like trace our two families and like see when the two of us were like hitting
really mad at each other.
and which weapons were our families using, what we did to each other. Oh, I was beating your mother. No, you know, she was starving me to death and taking away all my potatoes.
Do you get really mad at each other? Do you get really mad? Have you ever gotten so mad that you don't know what to do?
Well, not at each other, but
we really disagree.
Yeah.
Like to a profound level and can't resolve that.
How do you find a way through that if it's in a work, if it's in a piece?
We just keep, you know, the piece includes
then
argument.
That's good material.
That's almost the foundation of what you do, in a sense.
We find one big one for each piece and then just keep working on it.
But which is different than, at least to this point, what our process is.
Right, we're always trying to come to a consensus.
Yeah, now do you think that's dangerous? Do you think we have to change that?
I think that is what a lot of people do.
Well, it also may be part of the process. You know, I mean, it may be. I mean, I think you have to find a lot of consensus.
I mean, in some way, we have to find consensus too. Otherwise, the piece isn't going to happen. I mean, we have to decide. Yeah, that's the one. That's the point on which we're.
Yeah.
Is the whole class sitting on this side?
Pretty much.
Really? Well, let's get them. Community, you know. Why didn't you want to collaborate with us? Maybe we should hear from you.
Yeah, what kind of questions
We
come
want
up?
to hear the
Yeah.
difference of opinion.
One thing I was kind of interested in, I was sitting here thinking, well, what should I say here? And I'm thinking, well, I don't want to say something just yet because I'm not sure if I've thought this all the way through. And it's got to be a big issue when you think of collaboration. You got to have the other person's got to feel the trust or the investment is there.
Right.
The investment for that person to go, let me sit back here and really understand where this person's coming from. And that seems to be a big problem within the world that we live in today. We're so fast, we're doing all these different things. We don't really slow down and take the time to say, hey, I understand where this guy's coming from, or I understand where that person's coming from. We all have to word our things in such a precise way that that person's going to understand, or the other person's going to have the interest.
That's really important, actually. That's
The
really
time that it takes like 3 times as long to collaborate as to work alone, or 10 times, or whatever.
It does take a long time.
That's
a long time.
And the more people, the more time.
That's right. The more people, Pam's
another person.
Yeah. But I think that also there's you described something really important, because I think that in my experience of collaborating, so much of what I'm doing is I'm listening. I'm invested in all of a sudden trying to find out what is going on with this person. Where are these thoughts coming from? And it's like I have to go over my normal boundaries that I have with the world in order to do that. And I think that's scary, but I think it's also exciting.
But also we have to describe that we don't know the ultimate answer, like all the way along the way, saying, I don't really know. I haven't thought it all the way out.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm going to tell you where I'm at now. And then that is like, oh, you haven't been thinking about this, you know, and then it goes the next step, you know, so that the other person does drag you to the next position, the next and the next, you know, and that you do have to have trust that they're not going to slam dunk you for having only gotten this far. And that's where I feel like the trust is involved, and that she does tell me, oh, you've only made it this far, and that I have to say, oh, that's okay, all right, like I don't have to be humiliated by that.
And then this, by the same token, sometimes you'll have a thought that, I mean, I thought about this. I mean, when Pam and Annie and I collaborated on a competition, Pam Palmer, the landscape architect over here, and sometimes a little bit of a thought would come out, and that felt very informed, and somebody would pick it up and go, oh yeah, well, what about that? I mean, and so there's also the other side of that, where you can, a thought can come out, just to begin an idea, and somebody picks it up and takes it someplace that may be really valuable, much more valuable than you could have thought of. You know? So that's also a very interesting. It's almost like, I almost think of the space as like synaptical space. You know, the place in your brain where the neurons jump. You know, or the Tibetan Buddhists call it the gap. And you're really working in the gap. We're really working in that synaptical space, and it's transpersonal. But and I think Annie's right. I think we're going counter to a very long educational process, which is pretty exciting actually to be going counter to that. But what do you think? What comes up when I say that? Or what are you? Sigrid, what are you thinking about?
Well, I think it's not just our education process. I thought it's our society in general that's very individualistic and competitive that is actually going against that collaboration.
That's true.
Idea. And actually, it's funny. We were just trying to work on a project together, and we were trying to collaborate, and it didn't work. It ended out that a lot of the energy, or most of it, was lost. Just trying to see who has the power over the other, who pushes his ideas, and I mean that's why I think it's really great when people actually get to the point where they are really collaborating, because I think when you're collaborating you do arrive at much, I mean it's very efficient, you get to a much higher point than you would separately.
There's two.
I think, I just said so on her, I think, but was that because you didn't get to choose who you were working with?
Right.
So I think if all you guys all know each other and you all have that common, whether it's disinterest in each other or you have a common interest in wanting to learn by experimenting and stuff. But if you're forced to work with somebody I think that's very hard.
You know something? I disagree. I know that can be true, but I disagree. I taught a class about 2 or 3 years ago with, like, there were 9 people in the class. None of us had any video experience, and we were supposed to make a videotape together. And it was an incredible experience because we were in this little tiny editing room together 4 days a week, 8 hours a day. And there were people who were like, there was like 1 or 2 people who were incredible irritants, and there was a lot of conflict. And by the end of the experience, it was very clear that there was every single person had their part. Every single person had a very important part to play. It's kind of learning how to. It's like learning how to sing that. It's learning how. I mean, I think Sigrun said something important, which is you have to be able to give up the idea that if you're more competitive, if you're first, then it's gonna be better. I mean,
One is that I feel like with those power plays, the best way to kill a power play is to, like, give back, like fall to it. Just don't play to it.
Yeah, I have a trick that I use because in the classes that I teach, I always put them in a team situation. Sometimes teams are formed by their own social grouping, and there is inevitably one team that is by default the ones that don't have anybody who are friends in the class. And it always was difficult until I finally found this one trick that works most of the time now, is that I ask the people in the team to say what is so great about that person. And they take their turns. And what is so great about their work that you know of? These are students to students. And I found that once they voice that positive thing, they now have this kind of, some kind of contract between them that you are bringing something to it that I see as great. And there's just that kind of commonality. Right, that you actually express that so that the other person heard that you now have this respect for that person. And somehow that begins, at a certain level, at the most basic social level,
somebody
that,
power tripping
there is a benefit, that you are bringing into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And that's, somehow that seems to work most of the time.
It's like I think you can't compete if you're not competing.
It takes 2 to compete. If one's not competing, then there's just this.
There's also an analogy of a collaboration that, just popped up to my mind when we were speaking, that collaboration is much more like a conversation, where in a conversation, I start out with a ball, I pass the ball to you, you pass it back to me, I pass it to someone else, and pretty soon this ball is it's a coffee mug and it's turning into a, something else, and then you just keep passing it along, and that you have some place where it actually finally, you exhausted everything, it's the end of the conversation, you all go home. But a collaboration is somewhat like that what started out maybe as a ball, when it gets passed along in a conversation, eventually ended up being the lamp,
Do you think that collaboration forces you to change your definition of success, what successful is? In terms of, I know it's difficult in a classroom situation, but if someone has power plays or doing, not every collaboration works, and you can learn from those that don't work as well as I did from mine. I think it was real instructive, and it was painful, but it was real important, I think.
Success was generally taught to us
as something,
I win, you lose. But success in the collaboration is how well did you converse. Did the ball turn into a lamp?
Remember that
did the ball
thing
stay
that
as
we
a ball?
We were talking that too. That part of this thing is that you didn't allow a piece to happen where you didn't say what you were meaning to say, as well as you overstated your opinion.
But partly what we've focused on is the product. We can do something greater than what one person can do. But in the sense of doing this book with Illich, for instance, I came to love him very much. and just seeing how his mind worked and how he got through sentences, that the book sort of disappeared in the background for me. And what it was and I always think, it's called social intercourse for a reason. It's very erotic and it's very highly charged, and that for me became the collaborative part. The architecture of the discussion between us.
So what if you answer your question about success?
How what?
Your
What is
question
success?
about success.
I think if they fall apart, they can be successful. I think that you have to, when Molly talks about ambiguity, I wonder what it would feel like to have surety about something. It seems to me the nature of the game, right?
Yeah.
From the moment you come out, whether or not you're going to be slapped or fed, that ambiguity is, the process. So I think but I think one has to, as Illich says, one has to remain open to surprise for whatever comes out, whatever happens.
Which speaks directly to your point about having to think it through.
Yes, it was.
Sometimes trying to think it through, you don't open the door that's going to open the
Absolutely.
And it's important not to think you have to think it through, but to find the door and open the door.
It's easy to say that, but the thing is, I'm a student, and I've gone through. We're all students in life, but the thing is, we grow up with certain ideals about process and what that means, and then as time goes on, one learns to change, and one learns to understand what can arise from what one knows or what the situation is. Instead of thinking, a lot of times I think of process as being something that means to an end, and that's not always the case.
We opened our collaboration to a deceased artist to see if we could reach across the continuum of creation. If we could touch this person and this person could touch us. If we had thought about that a lot, I don't think we would have done that at all. I don't think, it took a lot of time. Got very deep and dark, and I'm sure if I thought about it, or if we had really talked about it a long time, we definitely would not have gone there. But the fact that we did go there, and we opened the door, the value is incalculable and measurable. And we are part of a continuum. This flame of creation is from the beginning of time, and it's a conversation, a dialogue that's ongoing across that continuum of time, and we're just the moment of this speck, of this instant. But it was interesting to reverse ourselves and see if we couldn't go back and touch that person and have that person touch us. Wow. And what would that do for the work? And what would that do for our collaboration?
You set off something. I was thinking about this afternoon about collaboration, and I pulled out this book. This is a book from the show in Paris called The Magicians of the Earth. And there's all of these artists from all over the world, and there's the most amazing art. Some of it is just absolutely amazing. But always, to me, the most extraordinary piece in the whole book is this Aboriginal group who talk about. Here's the piece. Huh? No, it's the yam. It's the yam. It's the yam. It's the yam dream. And they talk about how they are collaborating, in a sense, with their forefathers, and with the dead, and with those to come, and with the land. And it's if anyone wants to see it, it's a really beautiful piece.
Dennis wants to see it. He's got his glasses on.
Yeah. But that's
touching the land is important. Touching time is important.
But I was thinking about that driving here. That in a sense, can we collaborate? Can we collaborate not only here, but with the past? Not in a sense like this kind of 20th century notion of this lineage of artists, or this modernism, that kind of idea, but really collaborating with those that have gone before us and those who will come ahead of us. And Judith, what?
Well, I keep fading in and out of something that I want to say that keeps bubbling up and then going down and bubbling up. But Dennis and you now are both touching on it so much that I feel like, maybe this is the time. But something we haven't talked about, Eugenia is well aware of my interest in science, and some of the other fires in the libraries that we've had have touched on contemporary quantum mechanics and the nature of the universe and what we're learning now about the nature of that which is, of all that is, seems to be pointing so far away from individualism and so much to unity. And that the creative process itself, Barry, I was so fascinated when you talk about, when you, in your initial statement, talked about the Greeks collaborating with their muse and medieval collaborating with God, medieval folk, and the Renaissance people coming up with this new concept of self. Well, there are those who would say, and have said for many years now, that the Renaissance was the death of humanity. And the Chinese culture putting so much confidence and emphasis on the group probably know something that we're just learning. I know that Indian society and the Hindus have had a way of addressing the universe and creation that we're now just beginning to touch on, and that collaboration, that is, that the creation itself, that the process of creation seems to come about when energy is put in, energy in, energy in, energy in, and something emerges. Now, if 2 people can do that, 3 people can do that, 1 person can do that just with the universe itself, because we're all in contact with all that is.
The numinous whole.
And we contact it and we do it ourselves. But what a blessing when we can do it with someone, when we can create something with someone. I mean, the procreative act is in a way the ultimate, in a way you get together with someone, you actually physically create another person. Wow, what's that, But there are other forms of creation as interactive and it can be just the self and universe, self and other, self and others, the group itself, this group, and I just wanted to address all that.
All that.
Took us right to a commercial break.
I also wonder, this is a stretch, in kind of traditional Western philosophy, the depth model of that, one can find the truth, through this kind of depth of either going around or through it or something, that, we're at this age now, we accept that these kind of layer, the layer theory of saying, that what you see is it and there is no truth behind it. The next layer is another layer that's just like another layer presented to you, and you don't have the depth, it's infinite. That we now accepted this